Welcome back to the program. I'm Paul Rines, and this is Module 7. And Module 7 is about getting action. And what that actually means is getting your viewers, readers, or people that are exposed to your copy via whatever medium you're delivering it to take action. And I told you in the last module that I was going to share some of the things that the top internet marketers do to get action. And these are things that I've learned not just from internet marketing, but also from a lot of experience in direct mail and a long history in writing copy and presentations and pitches for a variety of different venues. So we are at Module 7, and this is pretty much the halfway point in the base level of the training here. And I just want to take a second and acknowledge this as a checkpoint and congratulate you for the hard work that you've put in to be able to reach this point. There's an old expression that I'm fond of that says, if all you have is a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail. And that's true of so many things, but it really illustrates the value of ongoing learning and training and putting in the work necessary to get additional tools. And that's what we've really been doing at this point, is getting more tools in your toolbox that will benefit you not just today, tomorrow, but in the long run and for the rest of your life, as long as you're using any medium to communicate a message that you'd like to add more influence to. So I want to congratulate you on that. I also want you to acknowledge yourself and recognize that, you've put in the hard work. You made the decision to get this program and commit to going through it, doing all of the workbook exercises and printing out the workbooks and being able to do all of the things that you've done to reach this point. Acknowledge yourself and actually give yourself a pat on the back for that, because it feels good to do that. And, physically, literally reach up right now and reach around and give yourself a pat on the back and just feel how good that feels. And when was the last time you did that? So congratulations, and recognize that you're doing a lot of work that's going to benefit you for the long term. So as we move into Module 7 and we look at the act of getting action from the viewer, reader, or people that are seeing your copy, I'm going to share a few images with you. And as these images come up, just take a second and tell me what it is they're communicating to you. So I'm just going to put one up after the other here, and they're in a variety of different poses and postures. There are no props of any kind, but there's just a person's figure, well, if you could call that a person, a figurine that's in a variety of different poses. And so what do those actually mean to you? As you go across the screen looking at the first one, left to right, what does that actually say to you? Now, the point of my asking you this and presenting these images is this. There is no dialogue of any kind, yet they're still communicating something to you. And the fact that there is no bubble which says this is what I'm thinking or experiencing, and there's no caption beneath it, and there's no props to help illustrate it, you only have what's being communicated by that figure physically. And that's an important distinction, because we call that analog communication. The words that we use when we're talking are considered to be digital communication, and the tone of voice that we use and the way that we use our bodies is considered analog communication. And I'm not going to go into a whole great detail about it here, but I do want to give you an overview of what it is and how it functions. So analog communication, just quite simply, is your tone of voice or the way you're using your body. And so when you understand analog communication, you recognize that we communicate on multiple levels. It's not just the words that we use. And analog communication can be different than your digital communication or the words that we use. And I'll illustrate what I'm talking about here. This is one of the base operators of what's known as Ericksonian hypnosis, which is based on Milton Erickson's work as a hypnotherapist. And it's a cornerstone of neurolinguistic programming, NLP. And everybody does this all the time, and that's why it's important. You can't not do it. Even though I'm not on camera here and you can't physically see me in the way that I'm using my body, it still affects the way that I'm communicating. If I were slumped over or laid back in my chair and totally reclined, it would affect my communication, and in all likelihood you would be able to perceive that. You would certainly be able to recognize that it was different than the posture which I'm assuming now, which is seated straight forward and sitting tall. So we all communicate this way all the time. We all use a tone of voice. when we're speaking with somebody. So these three levels of communication exist and take place, and it's something that you can't not do. And you can see examples of how your analog communication can be different than your digital communication. That is to say, your body or your tonality can be different than the words that you're using. When you see somebody who's shaking their head no while they're saying, yeah, I can do that, there's an element of doubt there. And this is unintentional analog communication, which is really just kind of somebody showing you, here's what's really going on in my mind. Now, that's a generalization. It can't be held that every time somebody's moving their head from the left to the right that they're being deceiving in their communication with you, or that they have a secondary message. So I want to just throw that out as an understanding. It doesn't mean that this is something that you can look at and say, oh, well, this person must be being deceitful to me. There's more to it than that. The man who first mapped out all of these understandings is Richard Bandler, and he, along with his partner John Grinder, developed neurolinguistic programming, and it's based on the idea that what we communicate has to be interpreted by people that are listening to us. That's the cornerstone understanding of NLP. And when I actually met Richard Bandler back in the 90s and had the opportunity to, pick his brain a little bit, we actually talked about this, because one of the things that really stood out for him and the work that he was doing at that time was, the fact that we're all communicating on all of these levels all the time. So since we're already communicating in this way, we should direct some attention to it because it is perceived by people when we do it. So unintentional analog communication, that is where somebody's communicating one thing with their tonality and or their posture or physical use of their body being different from their words, costs people huge amounts of money every day. And it's because they're marking out a separate message that's being perceived by the people that they're engaged with. Now, how can you mark out a separate message? Well, it's simple, really. When we're speaking to or with another person or people, we're always communicating on these channels, verbally, and that's the words that we use, and non-verbally, which is the way we use our body or our tonality. And with that understanding in mind, I'll illustrate how these things impact our level of communication so that you really get a full grasp of how it functions. If I say, have a great weekend while you're walking out the door to leave the office, with no real emotion in my voice, just a comfortable, have a good weekend, as a goodbye, the words would typically just mean that, have a good weekend. However, in that same scenario, this time, instead of saying, have a great weekend, with no real emotional tone, I snarl the words with a nasty and sarcastic tonality. How much meaning do the actual words, have a great weekend, mean anymore when I actually say, have a great weekend? The words that I'm communicating have much less impact. So, another example of this would be same scenario, but here again, with me saying have a great weekend with no real emotional tone as I did the first time, just that comfortable sounding, have a great weekend as a goodbye. So there's really no tonal aspect to what I'm saying. However, this time as you turn around to wave goodbye after you hear me say it, you see that I'm standing there with my middle finger in the air, pointed right at you. Again, how much meaning do the words have a great weekend actually mean anymore? My nonverbal communication, that is what I'm communicating with my body, mean a lot more. Now, these are extreme examples for the purposes of getting you a quick understanding of a pretty complex idea, but it basically just boils down to this. When we're talking to somebody else, we're communicating using more than just the words that we're speaking. We're communicating using our tonality and our body, and very often those messages can outweigh what it is that we're saying with our words. That's it in a nutshell. Now, the next advance on that understanding is called analog marking. And so analog marking at the simplest level is just communicating on both of these channels simultaneously and intentionally. And now I want to step back for just a second and have you pay close attention and I want you to get excited at this point because you're going to get a lift in your skill set, having these tools in your hand, knowing that we've only just begun to scratch the surface as you face forward and your head starts to make sense now out of how all of this works to get people to take those actions now. And I just want you to acknowledge and recognize. Now, I'm going to interrupt myself for just a second here, because while I am giving you accolades, I'm also looking to demonstrate a specific point here as well. And that's this. How many of you are aware of the fact that in the last few seconds, you felt compelled to lift your hand and scratch your face, or that just as I've been talking, you felt the need to lift your hand and scratch your face or your head? And how many of you were aware of the fact that you were doing that? I ask that question because this is something that I love demonstrating in my live events when I have a group of people in front of me and I start talking about analog marking. And in doing this, what I've done within that dialogue is embed a specific message which instructs you to lift your hand and scratch your face or your head. And in the process of delivering that to live audiences, I'm able to get feedback. However, I know just from experience that a great number of those of you that are watching this program right now, during the course of that, felt the need to scratch your face or your head, and you may still be doing it now, and it's okay for you to stop if you are. But it's just a way of your mind showing you that there is actually ways of communicating with people on multiple levels. This is actually definitive. It actually works. And if you are one of those people who didn't fully experience that and get the gist of the entire thing, trust me that a vast majority of people who watch this will go through that and experience the idea of getting that separate message marked out. Now, this isn't about being able to make people do things like scratch their face. This is about recognizing that there are different ways to communicate with people and you can deliver different messages. And as we move forward, that's what we're going to explore more deeply. What I've done is just demonstrate an example of analog marking. And analog marking can really be thought of, an easy way to remember and understand it is to think of it as taking a highlighter and just marking out individual parts of your communication into a separate message. And the dialogue that I just read to you was, get excited about this and pay close attention because it will give you a lift in your skill set to have these tools in your hand, knowing that we've only begun to scratch the surface as your head starts making sense now out of how this works to create action. And so if I take my highlighter to this text and I highlight out the words that I built into that dialogue, we see that it comes out to lift your hand, scratch your head now. And I marked that out tonally, specifically to demonstrate to you how this works and give you an example that you could have as a real life experience on the impact that it actually has. Now, here's the thing. You can go back and replay that and listen to the tonal shifts that I made while I was saying those words to mark them out so that your subconscious would be able to pick them up as a separate message. Lift your hand, scratch your head now. So I built that dialogue into what otherwise sounds like a meaningful presupposition about what I'm talking about. In other words, get excited about this because something really cool is happening. And within that, I built the structure of giving the instruction for you to lift your hand and scratch your head. And if you do go back and replay that dialogue, and I suggest you do, I've exaggerated to an extreme degree the amount of tonal shift that I've made using those words because it doesn't have to be really significant. One other thing I want to point out is that I told you at the very beginning of that, I want you to pay close attention, which puts your mind on alert that something else is coming. And that's an important thing to build into that. And I'll cover more about that in just a minute. But I did want to point out to you that it is here and it's an important factor in all of that. And so analog marking, again, is communicating on two different channels, verbally and non-verbally, and marking out a specific and separate message within your non-verbal communication. Now, when you string together a group of separate words like this into a structure of a larger overall picture, that's called an embedded command. And we're going to get into that more later, but for now, just know that that's what it's called, is you've taken and embedded a separate message into a larger overall message. And you've done that by marking it out with your analog communication, either tonally or physically. So, One of the things that I often bring to mind, a very popular program is the Law and Order Criminal Intent. And Vincent D'Onofrio, who's just an amazing actor, who's just has built an incredible body of work both on the large screen and on television. And Vincent D'Onofrio uses all of the aspects of what I'm talking about here to be able to connect with people that he's interviewing during the course of the program. His character is very adept at utilizing this, and they've got some technical consultants on the show specifically that helped him develop these skills. It's obvious by the delivery once you're aware of what it is, and so that's something you can take a look at that really demonstrates a lot of how this takes place, but it's just outside of your conscious awareness typically unless you've been educated about it. And so analog marking is communicating on both the verbal and nonverbal communication channels simultaneously, and doing so intentionally. Now, here's the thing. I want to remind you, we are always doing this. We can't not do it. It's part of our structure for communicating. So it's a matter of understanding how it's useful and how to interpret it that you begin to realize this is useful to you as a tool. You can go about this a number of different ways. Verbally, you always have the words as your verbal component because words make up the verbal component of human communication. So non-verbally, though, you can make different adjustments. So verbally, you've got your words. Physically, you can make a shift of some sort. You can lean back in your chair. You can change location. You can turn your head or tilt your head. You can move on the stage if you're in a public event. You could do anything as little as raising your eyebrows, depending on who your audience was and how you were trying to deliver your message. That's the physical component. That's moving yourself physically to mark out a specific message. Visually, you could pick an anchor point that's just off camera if you're on camera doing a promotional video, or just to the left or right of your audience if you're at a live event. And when you talk to that specific place, if you set up the right methodology for doing it, you'll be delivering specific messages. And so it's visual anchor points where you're looking at a specific place in space while you're delivering these messages. And then you can make tonal shifts, as I demonstrated with the example that I gave you there where you were scratching your head. And if you weren't aware of the fact that you were scratching your head, a lot of people aren't. It's something that's wholly unconscious. We've done this again in my live events, and it's really great because when I stop people and say, how many of you are aware of the fact that you're scratching your head right now? And you look around the room and all of these people's arms are raised because they're scratching their heads. They weren't even aware of it. But here's the interesting thing. If you let it go and you ask about it after the fact, many people will have done it and have no recall of actually having done it. And we've played this back on videotape to demonstrate for people. No, you actually just did. Right when I said the word now, your hand went up and you started scratching. And so that's something to understand from an experiential standpoint. Now, here's the thing. People get this. When you're in person, like I'm just talking about here, doing this at my live events, I can actually get feedback because I see all of these people raise their arms and start scratching their heads. The people that you're engaged with will let you know that they understand your separate message, and they don't even know they're doing it. Why? Because you're communicating with their subconscious. While you and the person you're engaged with are having a conversation, you're also engaged in a separate dialogue with that person's subconscious mind. And you can make entire rooms of people need to pee or get headaches or question your credibility or want to buy from you using this skill. You can get worldwide audiences in those same states if you're creating a video that's going out to a global audience. I can't go into a lot more detail about that now in this program, just given the runtime that we have. For now, it's just important that you know what analog marking is and how it works. To recap really quickly, analog marking is communicating on both verbal and nonverbal channels simultaneously. Verbally is your words, non-verbally is your tone of voice or the way that you use your body. It's directing that process. We're going to take a look at a couple of usage examples so that I can really illustrate this. And the most classic example, the most widely used, the most commonly known, I think, by most marketers is the following. By now, you may be wondering. You've probably heard that thousands of times and may or may not have been aware of it all the different times you have heard it. But the intention of the marketer who's written that copy or the presenter who's delivering that on camera is to communicate the words buy now, B-U-Y-N-O-W. Buy now. And this is used, in my opinion, overused probably, but it's been around since the beginning of advertising and perception and perceptual models started being developed, and well used in the direct sales field for decades. I first heard it explained back in the 1960s when I was a little kid by one of my relatives. So I do want to point out that using this model for communicating messages to somebody by framing a message with inside of a message, in the example of buy now, you may be wondering how much this program costs. By doing that and using this buy now example, which everybody really is attached to and uses, is the most limited, the most rudimentary, basic way of using this particular language model. In addition to that, most people that are using it are doing it incorrectly. And I'll explain what I mean. You see, you can't just say, buy now, you may be wondering. There's something I use in my promotional copies a lot of the times, and I'll put it on posters or ads or postings, and it's I see, said the blind man. And that's a common expression that almost everybody is familiar with, everybody's heard, and it's designed to show some wisdom that the blind man can see. What very few people don't understand is that there is a second part to that. And I've asked hundreds and hundreds, maybe into the thousands, of people if they're familiar with that expression. I see, said the blind man, and they all say, yes, absolutely. And then I ask them what the second part of it is, and almost nobody, and all of those many, many times I've done this, has been able to tell me what the second part of it is. And the second part of it is what makes it interesting, and it makes it ironic, and it makes it amusing. So I use that as an illustrative point because using the example that we're talking about here with buy now, you may be wondering, that's the same thing as I see, said the blind man. Most people that are using it don't know there's a second part to it. And so I'm going to explore with you a little bit about what that second part is so that if you are going to use that, you'll get a full understanding of how to use it correctly. And I'm also going to explore a little deeper into some of the less basic and less rudimentary elements of how to use that and write compelling copy with it. So, now, I know a lot of you are thinking, okay, well, I see, said the blind man. What's the second part? What's the second part? I see, said the blind man's first part is I see, said the blind man. But the second part is as he picked up his shovel and saw. I see, said the blind man, as he picked up his shovel and saw. So saying the expression I see, said the blind man is fine for an expression and a little quip, and it stands on its own just fine. But as he picked up his shovel and saw, adding that second part is what makes it ironic. It makes it amusing, and it makes it a little bit of a puzzle. How did he see? Did he see? Is saw a play on words that he actually saw, or is it just his saw that he picked up? So I see, said the blind man is great, but the next time that somebody says that to you and you actually look at him and say, as he picked up his shovel and saw, I guarantee you they'll look at you with a confused look on their face because they've never heard it before. The language patterns that I see people using in the creation of their copy is much the same way. So, two places that presenters of all types miss the mark entirely when they attempt to use this tool. One is they fail to mark out the message. And again, this can be done tonally. It can be where you look. It can be done with the shift of your eyebrows or your hand, where you're looking off camera, what have you. And most people that I see on camera absolutely pay no attention to the deliberateness of their movements on camera, that is, where they're looking when they're communicating specific messages. If they look away at all while they're on camera, it's generally just a random process. The truly polished speakers who go on camera never go on camera without intention of picking spots to communicate different messages to. It's certainly a consideration anytime I get in front of the camera to deliver a copy of any kind. I establish my bases of where I'm going to communicate what parts of my message to, and I look at those areas specifically. So that's just a big overview. It really comes down to this. what you're asking yourself now is probably, well, how do you mark out your message? So for the purposes of this example, I'm going to go on the understanding that we're scripting for a video sales letter and that the video sales letter is going to be the delivery medium. Since that's the case, there's one major question that you need to answer, and that's, will you be on camera? If your answer was no, I'm not going to be on camera, then you'll just be focused on making a slight tonal shift when you want to mark out your message. It's as simple as that. Changing your tonality at a specific point in time. However, if your answer was yes, and you are going to be on camera, then to be fully effective with this skill set, you need to make a tonal shift, just as I explained for the people that aren't going to be on camera, but you also want to pick a spot. Any spot will do, as long as it's not too far to the left or right of the camera. I've seen actually one 8-figure marketer use his shoes as the spot that he was choosing. Pick a lampshade or look behind the camera just to the right or left. Pick a bookshelf that is slightly to the right of the camera person. You can pick a spot on the wall or a flower or a briefcase. It really doesn't matter, as long as you're consistent with when you want to deliver a specific message. You're going to use that as what I call a pinpoint, which is just the term I've kind of coined for that. And that's your place you're going to pin messages to, just to make it an easy memory aid for you. And it'll be easy to remember because that's where you pin everything to. So you're going to pick pinpoints around you in your environment when you're on camera delivering your message and content. Now, this becomes as simple as looking away from the camera at your pinpoint anytime you want to mark out a certain message. And that's where people miss the mark on using this tool. They're engaged with the camera entirely, staring at it virtually the entire time, almost that deer in the headlights thing, or they look away frequently but without any direction to it. There's no craft to their process. And so when you start getting the idea of pinpoints, choosing different pinpoints for delivering different messages, anytime you want to mark out a separate message, all you need to do is look at that pinpoint and start delivering the message that you want to communicate. You'll also want an accompanying tonal shift when saying the words that you want to mark out. A mild shift is all that's required, and the act of looking off camera at your pinpoint will shift the shape of your throat and your larynx anyway, causing some tonal shift all on its own. So a very mild enhancement to this is all that's really required. So that same thing we started out with in the beginning becomes, by now, you may be wondering, I've marked it out tonally and with my timing, delivery, cadence, and other things, but it's very subtle. And because I'm continuing on with what they may be wondering about, they're not paying attention to the fact that I marked out the words by now. So, critical miss. Here's a somewhat advanced understanding, but it's where all but the best miss out on this truly powerful element of this connection strategy, and that's this. You need to set up communication between yourself and a specific part of the listener's psyche to be truly effective with this. And as I said, almost no one but the most educated of communicators actually does this. So, how do you go about doing it? Well, it's really simple. People are parts. And I don't mean parts like individual puzzle pieces that stand alone unto themselves. It's more like a ship and the individual compartments that make up an overall ship. It's a part of a whole overall structure, not something that stands apart and unto itself. And once you get an understanding of this, and like I said, it's a bit of an advanced concept. Once you understand that, it's not much of a reach to realize that you can actually talk to those individual parts themselves. And so the way that this operates is as follows. Different parts of us are responsible for different psychic duties. That is, things that our psyche is assigned to doing. So you have parts of you that are responsible for being concerned about things. You have parts of you that are responsible for being responsible about things. You have parts of you that might be wondering about things. These are different parts. Parts of you that make sure of everything. Parts of you that watch out for different things. Now, those parts of you take on those psychic duties. And so there's parts of you working around the clock on these various things. And if you wonder where stress comes from and where people get overwhelmed with it, it's that they've got a lot of these parts working overtime. And so one of the ways that therapeutically you deal with that is to calm down what their parts are doing and the amount of work that they're taking on and the things that they're focused on. It can just become overwhelming. And so most of us have found a way to balance all of that, and we have parts of us that are just on guard for different things when they show up. And that's the way most people operate. Now, the parts of you that have these psychic duty examples, there's a second part to the job that they have and the function that they provide, and that's to cover your core values. And when you think about core values, think about life and death situations, protecting you from financial disaster, ensuring your financial security, big things, providing your loved ones with the security that they need. All of these things that are really big are your core values. Again, you have to think big picture life and death. And so once you understand this, you can actually take a psychic duty example and combine it with a core value and actually start to understand how the pieces of you that fit together to make up the whole, that look out for you on a daily basis, how they actually function. So you can actually tell somebody, I want to talk to that part of you which is responsible for your financial well-being. Now, this should be done early on in your presentation. And what you're doing is early on establishing communication with a part of somebody that is responsible for, in this case, their financial well-being. And if, again, you pick that credenza flower briefcase or bookshelf and you look at it while you're actually delivering that message, when you look back at it and deliver a message and say, and this is of critical interest to you, that part of them will understand that what's coming is of critical interest to that part of them which you addressed before, which again in this case is the part of them what's responsible for their financial well-being. Again, this should be done early on, that you set up these communication channels with these different parts of people and readdressed at critical times. And so very simply, it becomes a psychic duty combined with a core value. And you can set up a framework to talk to any part of anybody that you want using that same exact model. I want to talk to that part of you that had a psychic duty to a core value, and you're on your way and you're communicating. Again, the psychic duty examples and the core value examples that I've included in your workbook are there just to give you an idea. Don't think that this is the boundaries of what's available. There are an infinite number of different places you can go with this, and it's literally limited by only your creativity and your ability to observe what's going on with the people or guide the people that are listening to you through specific experiences. And so here again, psychic duty examples, just to take it a little bit further for you. Psychic duty example is a part of you that's concerned about, again, core values, think life and death, is responsible for protecting you from financial disaster, maybe wondering about ensuring your financial security. Always make sure that providing your loved ones with. And so you can actually just take these, crisscross them, mix them and match them, and you have a whole body of ways to communicate with different parts of people. And so that is analog marking. And while I can't go into any more detail about it now, you have a great deal of understanding about it that'll be useful to you. This is just scratching the surface with this material. We go into this in extreme detail in the Influence Mastery Training Program. It is a powerful component of communication and influence. So I encourage you again to look into that. If these kinds of things pique your interest and you go, wow, that's pretty amazing that you can actually communicate in those ways, discovering this is a critical skill, and understanding these tools will change your life. And you know, we've had everybody from lawyers, parents, counselors, doctors, therapists, hypnotherapists, people from all walks of life that benefit from this, because influence is such a critical skill. And I've spent the last 30 years of my life really focused on training the best skills of influence, and really created a specific model that'll allow you to communicate with more influence than you ever thought possible. So the next evolutionary step of analog marking is something called embedded commands. And embedded commands really are the next evolutionary stage of analog marking. And embedded commands are basically the concept of wrapping an entirely detailed message or set of instructions inside of a bigger package or a bigger message. And this goes beyond way, farther than simple statements like buy now, to detailed and specific sets of instructions that you want the listener to understand, interpret, and weigh the merits of. Now, this is not a magical cure. I want to make that perfectly clear. It's not about waving your hand and uttering a few magic words that make everybody hit the buy button. This is merely a means to get your listeners fully engaged, both consciously and subconsciously. Because you see, what you have here is a tool set. And that's what you can do with this tool set, is connect better with people. This isn't a means of crawling around in somebody's head with a miner's cap and a pickaxe, getting them to do things they wouldn't otherwise do. It's a means of being more connected with them and showing them that you're polished enough of a communicator to be able to communicate with them on multiple levels. Now, as powerful as this is, you should know that it just isn't a magic cure. And so that's why I take a minute here and make this point. When you do utilize these tools to connect with and communicate with people, you get the people engaged both fully, subconsciously, and consciously. And this is recognized by the listener as a suggestion, but it's a subconscious suggestion. And that helps people get out of their own way sometimes, where moving outside of their comfort zone is concerned. And that's really the value of this, is helping somebody get out of their own comfort zone. This communication, when it's recognized by the listener, it's taken as a suggestion, a subconscious suggestion. And this is a helpful means of getting people to take action when they're sitting on the fence because they're connected to their past fears that keep them in their comfort zone. One of the things that stops them from being successful. So in a sense, you almost owe it to your listeners to be able to communicate with them in this way so that you can best help them in getting the skills that they need. So, embedded commands, give you a couple examples here. What if we wanted to suggest to them that we wanted them to take some action right now, such as clicking the buy button? Well, we could very easily just write into our dialogue, for the first 10 people that take action right now and click the buy button. Now, you've heard this if you've watched any level of internet marketing messages, promotional pieces, infomercials, TV ads, read ads physically in the printed page. You have experienced this on hundreds and hundreds of occasions. And again, the subtlety is the art form, but essentially what we're doing here is telling people to take action right now and click the buy button. Again, we're embedding that into a larger message. So we're framing it that the first 10 people to do something specific will get something specific. So that's the overall picture. The message within it is to take action now and click the buy button. Again, you can back up the video and replay it if you want to hear the way that I distinguish that. It's pretty subtle, but it is direct, and I want to mark that out to people. So that's an example of a way you could use an embedded command. Now, another element of this is embedded questions. And embedded questions are the same thing as embedded commands, but it causes people to go inside and actually ask themselves how they would answer the question that you've posed. And so an example of this that I've actually heard a very high producing marketer use to fill a $3,000+ training program was, he said, and I get excited because I'm wondering what it is that you're going to discover first when you join the program. So that's a very subtle message, and it's a very subtle way of getting you to go inside and ask yourself the question, what will I discover once I get in there? All he's saying is he's wondering about what you might discover, and he's excited as he wonders. He's not telling you to imagine it. You do that on your own. And so that's what we call an embedded question. And again, not going into full detail about this, but wanting you to understand that these things do exist. If you want to explore them further, again, Influence Mastery 2X PaulRinex.com. The Embed Formula. Now, I wanted to find a way that I could actually teach people to do this and do it effectively and do it easily and do it the right way so that they're actually getting the maximum impact from it. And again, the reason that I go into any of these language patterns is because I've seen so many people just miss the mark and really not know why. And the elements that I've been covering over the course of this last segments of this video series are really defining moments, defining factors that determine whether or not you're going to be successful with what you're doing, that what you're presenting is going to go over well or it's not. And so that's why I go into this, is because I've seen so many people just miss the mark and do it wrong. They get really close and they just miss the mark. So I created the Embed Formula, which actually teaches you how to do this. So first you have to get clear on what you want, and you have to name it for what it actually is. So you might think that you want them to donate to your cause or crowdfund you, but what you really want is for them to give you money right now. Wouldn't you agree? You might think you want them to promote you, but what you really want them to do is to email for you. So we're getting clear on what we want and naming it for what it really is. You might think that you want them to sign up for your list, but what you really want is, yes, you guessed it, you want for them to give you their name and email address. And you might think you want them to join your membership site, training, or sign up for your newsletter or coaching or continuity or recurring monthly billing program. But what you really want is to have them bite off yet another monthly payment. So I always like it when I get to this point and explain the Embed Formula, because this is really, you really get to have some clear understandings of it, because it gets you clear on what it is that you're doing. So we get clear on what it is that you want, and then we name it for what it actually is. And so what do you want them to do? Usually it's click the buy button. We've already covered that. So let's look at some other examples. And the ones I'm going to share with you here are ones that I've actually seen in top marketing launch videos. So one of them is bite off another monthly payment. And in this particular instance, I heard something very similar to this. I want you to know that before you say yes and bite off another monthly payment, that this is about what you will make, not what you will spend. Another example that I've actually heard in a launch video. You're trying to get somebody to do a mailing for you, and the way that I heard that delivered was this. Now you may be saying to yourself, do I want to go ahead and agree to do a mailing for this promotion? Just as simple as that. And it was followed up with something like, do I want to agree to go ahead and do a mailing for this promotion? Ask yourself this. Can you spend more money, or something like that? So it was just followed up with more information built around the embedded command. And I've heard this multiple actually times. I can't say many, but multiple, which is go ahead and type in your name and email address delivered in this way. So are you asking yourself, am I just making this offer so that you'll feel compelled to go ahead and type in your name and email address? No, not at all. And it's because... So I hope you're getting this. Like I said, I can't go into it with a great deal of detail, but I am covering it in a way that hopefully for the purpose of creating copy, you get a full understanding of this. Now, we can actually take this just a little deeper still by personalizing it. And the way that you personalize it is you make them own it. So you say, when you join my global audience of students. So you're actually telling them within that, join my global audience of students. And when you personalize it by saying, when you join my global community of students or global audience of students, they actually have to go inside and kind of make a internal representation of that. So that's one way of doing it. Once you become an Inner Circle member now, you will unlock the full power of this membership training program. After you click the buy button, you'll have full access to... Now, I just kind of slid that one in. How'd that go by? Did you pick up on it? I did that because I really want to illustrate that this happens so frequently, and I want you to start becoming sensitive to it, because the more you understand it, the more you'll be able to benefit from it yourself when you see the various applications that it has. Okay, so just a couple of other important things here that I want to remind you of, and a couple of tips I want to share with you before we close this section. And first thing I want to remind you of is to engage that yes response throughout your copy. Particularly if you're doing a video sales letter, you want to engage them and elicit that yes response. Asking questions like the ones I've got listed here are really good at doing that, because because you are engaging with them and you're eliciting the yes response. So both things are served. And I want you to remember anytime you're creating copy, especially for a video sales letter, to include those questions throughout. Does that make sense? So the other thing is preemptive closing. And if you're doing a video sales letter or a webinar in particular, you can overcome objections by answering questions. And a lot of times these questions are actually just framed in a way that allow you to overcome the objections. And this is more in the realm of launch training for a product launch, but it really is a significant factor when it comes to scripting your copy, because it gives you the opportunity to put objections out there in the form of questions, and then it allows you to answer them, giving a framework that's built around benefits. So, preemptive closing. Never use think about it, think about that, or what do you think about that, or what do you think that would be like, or any other similar phraseology that involves having them think. Remember, people buy on emotion, not logic. And when you ask people to think about things, it makes them go into their logical mind. I've heard this time and again in all kinds of different promotional materials. Do you think that you'd be able to use that? What do you think would happen if? Anytime you're asking people to think about it, not only are you engaging them in getting into their cerebral mind, their logical brain, you're also giving them the idea that thinking about it is a good idea. So when you want to make a buying decision, or ask them to make a buying decision rather, and you've told them to think about things over and over again through the course of the copy, you're going to get a response which is, I want to think about it. I've seen this time and again with direct sales. You know, do you folks think you could use this? Do you think your business could benefit from this? And what do you think would happen if you had this in place? And how do you think your employees would react to it? And the salesperson doing this presentation thought that he was doing a really great job, but at the end of it, he said, so what do you think? And the guy says, well, I want to think about it. And I've observed that many, many times. So avoid using think about it, think about that. What do you think that would be like? Okay. Couple of things to remember. I just said this. People buy on emotion, not logic. People buy on wants, not needs. And people buy benefits. They don't buy facts, features, or advantages. So when you're writing your copy, you want to be focused on benefits. In the next section, we're actually going to get to copy and content creation. There's a phrase that I came up with that just kind of came out of my mouth many, many years ago during a live event, and it was that if you need to build a tree house, you have to have at least 2 trees. And so we're going to get you a couple of trees here that you can build your content with and on. And the first thing we're going to do is get a bigger picture of what it is that your product or service is all about, and then we're going to create a model based on that bigger picture. So that concludes this section of the program, and we're going to stop here and take a minute and shift your perspective, and we're going to do that by having you get a bigger picture. And in order to do that, what you're going to do next is complete the compelling copy bonus module that's attached to the members area, and you can download that there. You cannot proceed any further in the program until you complete this process. So go ahead and make that download now. Watch the accompanying video and complete the exercises in that, and then come back and proceed to the next video, and I'll see you there.